We are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Shaun Attwood channel. Our discussion tonight, I've been so excited about. It is about the cabal. It is about Jazz, who is joining me, leaving the cabal, and he has a wealth of knowledge from inside the cabal. There is so much to unpick. So please like, share. If you're not subscribing, subscribe. Leave us comments and questions. And throughout the chat, I'm going to be asking some of your questions to Jazz. Now, I just wanted to start this stream by just a recap of what the definition of the cabal is, because it's in many ways a very complex area. And I thought it'd be really good for us to all recap on what the actual definition is. So a cabal is a group of individuals secretly united to promote their own interests. So that's not a conspiracy theory. That is true. Often through intrigue and hidden agendas, and usually with negative connotations. It implies a degree of secrecy, conspiracy, and often a pursuit of power or influence within a larger group or organization. The term can also refer to a secret plot or clique. Cabals are characterized by their clandestine nature. Members typically operate behind the scenes, keeping their true motives and activities hidden from outsiders. The primary goal of a cabal is often to advance the personal or factional interests of its members, sometimes at the expense of others or the larger community. Correct. The term cabal is generally associated with negative perceptions, implying unethical or manipulative behaviors. So there we go. There we have the short summary of what a cabal is. And before we kind of deep dive into your incredible life, Jazz, I wonder if you can just introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background and the family that you've come from, because it's incredibly unique and pivotal to this story.
Okay. From my perspective, it doesn't seem incredibly unique. And I think some of your audience may actually have come from similar backgrounds as I have, but many probably have not. So
Jazz, can I just pause you 1 second? Can we try without your headphones? Just because I don't know if the sound's sounding a little bit, there's some feedback.
Give me a moment. Okay.
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
All right. As long as you can hear me, all right. It's actually better for me.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So you asked me to talk a bit about the family background. And when you come from a family, it's just your life. It doesn't seem so extraordinary. There are times, there's times in my life I've looked back and put it in perspective, or tried to. We were always told we came from upper middle class. This is a code word. When you live among very wealthy families, they're often coding each other and people rate each other, and there's many subtle ways that's done. I'm sure people know shows like The Shaws of Sunset or, Survivor, and people are always trying to show off their bling or have an ego. But when you grow up in a culture, it's just your culture. And there's regular people. I mean, I grew up in small towns. And the small towns I happened to grow up in was the richest county in the United States, which was odd to me because there's places like the Hamptons, which have even bigger mansions. And a lot of the people I grew up around had their summer homes, their extra homes in Hawaii, in Tahoe, in the Hamptons, in Europe. They would go to Europe every year. They'd go out on their boats or sail on the San Francisco Bay, their yachts. One friend of my father's, he had the world speed record for a speedboat, and he used to ride that on the San Francisco Bay. So to me, this was normal. But we grew up riding bicycles around, being able to go out alone actually, I used to ride my bicycle downtown to the local grocery store, and they used to give us hot dogs behind the counter. We used to use the phone attached to the wall behind the butcher's stand to call our grandparents, to call our parents, tell them we were there. And they treated us like family. So in one way, it was a beautiful childhood. California has some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. And I grew up backpacking and hiking, going down river rafting trips in these places, hiking all the time in our North Bay area. Mount Tamalpais, incredible. So in a way, I grew up in a magical sort of insulated childhood that was, well, actually later in my career, when I went into real estate, I worked with a lot of people from the Midwest, and we'd sit and talk, and we were speaking the same language. I talk about my childhood, they talk about theirs, and it sounded so much the same because we had a lot of Midwestern values. I mean, I knew people by name and reputation. I could walk in places and get something and pay later. Um, we had an account at the local grocery store across from my school, and they would let us charge things. And then they stopped all the kids from charging. And I saw the kids get stopped in front of me, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Don. You don't charge candy. We'll let you charge." Because I would just get like an apple or something. So I grew up around a lot of these rich kids. But what I did see was all kinds of personalities and abuses, a lot of lack of appreciation. A lot of the people I grew up around had maids or multiple, shall we say, staff, different
I
kinds of
think I
servants.
think as well though, what's so unique, and you're incredibly down to earth and grounded, but you did grow up as well with two sets of grandparents who by
Oh, yeah.
today's standards would be billionaires. That opens up a huge arena of different type of people.
Oh, yeah.
And that's your that was your key into the cabal,
Well,
wasn't
my
it?
grandparents were both my grandparents came from old money, and when I mean old money, it's very old money. My Also, one of the things rich do is they always trace their heritage back to royalty. But my grandparents had done an extensive genealogy, and so I knew a lot of the background of where I came from, which was very, very mixed. But a lot of it came from like the Scots, and there were the Scot royalty and the English and the German and the French sides. So my grandmother was born and raised in Paris, in Paris, but she was actually Swiss. Her father owned factories throughout Europe that he developed a leather tanning process. And one of his best friends, what ended up being one of my grandmother's very best friends, they developed and owned Lindt chocolate. And he had gone down to Madagascar and saw how they were grinding the beans. And so he developed factory to grind it that fine. And that's why Lindt chocolate today is so smooth. And I was very lucky to meet her in Europe when I was a little older, and arranged a trip for her to come see my grandmother. We hadn't seen each other in probably well over 60 years or something. Um, but that side of the family had morals, had a lot of ethics. My great grandfather on my grandfather's side was upstate New York, and they had a stone mansion on Lake Champlain. I got to visit that much later on. Incredibly beautiful home. I mean, really classy, not huge, big. I mean, pretty big, but not huge. But it had the rolling hills going all the way down to the lake. They owned the way up the hill, and these lawns were mowed, and it was idyllic. It was like a movie. We got to stay there with family, and then I got to visit another family. Had a very old, huge Victorian house. It looked like something out of a scary movie, but very beautiful. Um, and I got to go to upstate Vermont and visit family there. The guy was uh, a doctor, and he used to carry a black bag to all the families, delivered multiple generations. And we walked up to his white, old kind of Victorian house, small thing. It was a mess, total mess. They were shucking corn in the back porch. We were welcomed as family, but they had 88 acres of maple trees. So they used to always send us maple syrup every year. And we had our cousin Stuart, who on my father's side had big ranches and farms throughout California. They used to send us cases of, and we had another family did the same thing, cases of strawberries and, I'm sorry, cherries and, apricots and these special things. And so to tell you about my father's side, my grandparents' side, that was my grandparents. Grandfather, upstate New York, he was a high attorney. He actually helped defend the DuPont family from Teddy Roosevelt's breakup. And in a way, I kind of wish he hadn't. But also, DuPont is a double-edged sword. They do so many things for our world, but they've also polluted our environment, and that family's also very much involved in what we're talking about. So, but he also, to give an idea too, you had to explain like why these families were at this level. He rode his horse and buggy down to a cruise ship to go to Europe from his home in Lake Champlain, and he was late, and he was the last passenger. They held up that boat all day until he got there so that he could board and go. My great grandfather, on my grandmother's side, had multiple homes in Europe, the one in Paris and also in Avanches, Switzerland, a little tiny town. Great story about my grandparents meeting. That'd be maybe for another time. But my grandmother and my grandfather, ironically, they met at a later time. And my grandfather had been studying, left, he'd been studying in India. He'd come back, met my grandmother through family friends. My grandmother's mother, my great grandmother, had studied all kinds of esoteric knowledge and theosophy. She was well aware of ideas of past lifetimes. And literally, when she died, she called them both to the bedside. She said, "Now, Donnie, you take my right hand. Susie, you take my left hand." And she says, "I love you very much." And she talked to him a little bit. She closed her eyes and left. So that was a very much influenced me, my grandparents. They actually ended up getting married much later. My grandmother thought she was going to be an old maid. She actually joined the Bon Secours School of Nursing when she had a failed marriage, and that's another story. And that at that day and age, she had a daughter. The daughter was adopted by the grandparents because a single woman in the early 1900s did not raise a child as a single woman. But when she met my grandmother, they married and went off to India for 26 years, where my mother was born in Mumbai. She grew up knowing 3 Indian languages, French and English, fluently. And my grandmother used to be an interpreter for French. They finally came back. And ironically, when they came back, they came to Switzerland. My mother went to high school in Switzerland for a while. She said the Swiss were terrible to her, very prejudiced, always teasing her. And my mother came as an immigrant on a ship. They came through Ellis Island. Even though my grandfather's an American citizen, she had to make it on her 18th before 18th birthday, or she would have to apply for citizenship at the time. So when they arrived in New York, family and greeted them, and they said, "California is the most like India. Why don't you go to California?" So they hoofed it off to California, went to the wine country, and my grandfather was part of a very, very good trust. It was 11 children. He was the twins on the 11th. The last 2 are 10 and 11, my grandfather and my aunt or grand aunt. They picked grapes to get extra money for a typewriter for my mother for college. So my mother and father met when my mother went to Stanford nursing school, and my father was at Stanford Business School. So Stanford, if you don't know, is a very old money. It's a pretty old institution in California. It is the Western Harvard and Yale. Berkeley is the equal competitor. We had many friends Berkeley, many friends Stanford, and they would have the big Stanford games. So my father's grandfather, my great grandfather, had large farms. He started with flour sacks in Santa Rosa, California, and running them down barges. And he made a fortune on that. So he bought lots of farmland, and my dad used to say dirt farmers, but they were super wealthy farmers. Well, what happened later was they developed oil in California. And at that time, my great grandfather kept the mineral interests and sold off the farms to his manager and ended up making millions. So he helped found Standard Oil of California, which later became Chevron. And in San Francisco, he built 1001 California Street, which if you look it up, it's right across the street on the corner is Mark Hopkins Hotel. And then right next to Mark Hopkins Hotel is St. Francis Hotel. And right across from all 3 is the Grace Cathedral, which is a big deal for, I won't say cabal families, but the San Francisco Social Register. So my father was part of the San Francisco Social Register. Later in his second marriage, his wife was one of the ladies on the San Francisco Social Register, choosing families. This is how good bloodlines find good bloodlines, and they pick. They used to have arranged marriages, but this is like putting kids together, and parents have a lot of parents have a lot more influence about, no, not that kid. This is a good family. So they push these things along. Well, that grandfather, that great grandfather, had a rail car, and he used to go down and visit his oil fields. He had this rail car built as an identical copy to the rail car of Ulysses S. Grant that Ulysses S. Grant used to use to travel around the United States. And he bought a huge ranch, a dude ranch, up in the hills of Portola Valley. And we used to go to that as children all the time. My father has a 1/4 interest in it, and he really didn't get along with his brother, whom I got to know much better later on. So we'd go to this ranch. It had lakes and walnut groves, and it started from the bottom of Portola Valley, went all the way up to the ridge that looked over to the sea down at in it's Santa Cruz and such on the other side. So we had old growth redwood groves on that property and an albino redwood there. My cousin Stuart was my father's brother's son. He bought lots of land and became a huge farmer in California, but he also built a little steam train that went around this lake. And we used to ride on that. We'd go camping trips up there. My father had a large real estate company that he used. He went into banking first, graduated Stanford. He lived in San Francisco. He was kind of a wild kid. Used to shoot a shotgun off from the apartment till the police came for New Year's and do all kinds of wild things. He never really followed the rules. I could tell lots of
When
stories.
and when you were growing up,
Yes.
obviously all of all of these things were normal. It was what you knew. But
Yeah.
did you were you going to places like Bohemian Grove, or
Okay.
what
So
were you kind of
yes.
exposed to that
Well,
is
it's interesting because I was a black sheep. I was definitely a black sheep in the family, and I
that's why
followed.
we're talking to you.
Right, well, it absolutely is true because I was always an eye opener. I always wanted to know. I mean, at 1, 2, 3 years old, I can time these things by people who are in my life. I was asking questions. I learned the lesson, walk a mile in someone's moccasins before you judge them. And I was always trying to apply these principles. Meanwhile, I was the low man on the totem pole. I had 2 older brothers and a little sister. And my little sister, she even admitted later in life, she was very spoiled by the family. She was daddy's favorite. And then I was number 3 in line. So I was always tagging along. I always had hand-me-down clothes. So in a lot of ways, I lived a kind of normal life, almost like a pauper. I'm wearing their shoes. I'm wearing their clothes. They used to dress us up. This is 60s. They used to dress up in identical suits, like plaid red suits and little shorts. My father had a German lineage, and he was an Austrian. He was very proud of it. He tried to learn German later, and so I mean, it's kind of interesting. He used to always wear his lederhosen, and then later his next wife that he married actually was Austrian. She had an Austrian father who actually, when the Germans marched into Austria with their tanks into his town, he was a very wealthy aristocrat, but he also was a painter. And so what he did was he painted all the fancy designs on the Austrian houses that you see today that are 100 years old. And so when they came through the town, he sat on his balcony and yelled, "Get out of my town," and swore at the Nazis. Well, he had to get out of town. They actually chased him through the woods, stabbed him some multiple times, and left him for dead. Crawled out of the woods, survived, made it to the US, and they said, "What do you do for a living?" He says, "I'm a painter." So they had him painting houses. Well, he made a new life in the US. This was part of Austrian royalty. So that family, my stepkids that I grew up around, I knew they would have been in line for the Austrian crown. And then I knew also we always met people who they said, well, this is the Archduke, or they would have been, or they are. Like I went to Austria with my father and went to some castle, and we had a private meeting. We got to go through the place when all the crowd was gone, and we had tea with the family, with the descendants of this who owned the property. I mean, this was kind of part of my life, and the other part of my life was playing around with kids. I knew the cops town that I grew up in. Used to try to get them to chase us as kids. We do all kinds of things to kind of piss them off. And then the next day, one time the cops got on the grass of our little school and burned rubber on the grass and left this huge track that, of course, was there in the morning across our soccer field. And they almost got us. We learned to pole vault over the fences. So we got over the fence, and then they'd have to go all the way around. So the next day, we saw him and said, "Was that you on duty last week? Was that you I chased?" They knew we caused no harm. So they actually grew to respect us. And when I became a real estate agent, a real estate broker, I got to help Jim Rice, who was a police officer in the town still, and he'd been renting from the town in a terrible house. I had got to help him get his first house. And the day I closed on his deal, or got his offer accepted over the phone, I was closing the deal on my sister's house, got her first house. And I was on cloud nine. So to me, I had gone the other route, and my father said, "Why didn't you go to Stanford? I always wanted you to go to Stanford." I said, "Well, you didn't help me fill out the applications and such. I really wanted to go to Stanford because it was a forward-thinking school. It had a lot of creative people. I grew up around a lot of his friends who were Stanford grads, but I was into studying everything. I ended up taking a different route, going to community colleges. I had more units that before I even I had more units than a lot of my friends who had degrees and PhDs and such. But I ended up doing a lot of hands-on things, trying to go for life experience, and that drove my dad nuts. He
I
didn't know
think
how to
that's a
relate.
really interesting point as well, because it's obvious that throughout your upbringing, you were questioning things and, you weren't necessarily, well, let's just say when you were in these environments, you were the type of person looking to be out on your bike. You weren't judging people by their bloodlines and by their second names. Something I
Yeah,
think is
so that
really,
leads to an interesting concept. Um,
yeah, something I think is really important is with the bloodlines. What I believe is that people are really conditioned to know what to look for. I've seen friends of mine, I could tell you exactly how they would end up, who they would marry, and how life would pan out, because that was always the plan for them. They were never going to go, like, I don't look at people in a hierarchy, but their parents do. And they were never going to go 2 levels lower on the pyramid as such. They were
right,
only ever going to go up the pyramid.
right.
And so would you say that, um, you know, you were seeing people conditioned to kind of fit certain roles within your upbringing?
Okay, so this leads to a couple of concepts. One is perspective, because as I was growing up, I was around these people. I had to go to events and things. I mean, went to some amazing, amazing events, but I was always hearing other friends, other people who came from these uber wealthy families, had all these vacation homes, that they were going off to Austria skiing. They were going to, I knew all the names of all these places. They go to Alta, Vale. I got to go to these places. I got to go stay in ski cabins. My father had lots of friends. He chose not to. I was talked about buying one, like a cabin in Tahoe. He never really did, because we'd go stay at all these other friends' places. Um, and so when I'd meet these people, I'd notice in hindsight, especially, that they often try to measure you up or weigh you out or compare lineages or backgrounds or what do you do. Even my high school reunion, the first one was terrible. Everyone was sizing, well, what do you do for a living? And they were bragging, and it was pretty sick and disgusting. The 20-year was a lot better. People were a lot more down to earth. Um, but I also learned to ignore and walk away from these people. However, when I was in that stage, I went to debutante balls and these kind of things. And a lot of people were doing things our age, drugs, which is really common in California, and the wealthy had the best drugs. My friends, the parents said they sent them to private school to get them away from the drugs. Well, they always know the rich kids had the best drugs. So the perspective is that people will be who they are. People will
Mm.
be what they develop in themselves and what they are. And if you look at the cabal and you want to really understand this stuff, it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted, like a kaleidoscopic synaptic organism that can, and the people who really run the cabal, they're masters at reading people. They're masters at the sacred knowledge, which helps them do, like, if you look at sigils or um, the, let's say, can I say this the satanic worship, which is there's satanic churches, like in San
S.
Francisco, the
Um,
Church of S. Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, it's a legal term. They're legal churches. They're valid. And I had friends who I talked to about these things. But then when you go into these, there's also like, there's the Shriners, there's all these organizations do philanthropic work, and they have a lot of professionals and respected people and government people in the society. Um, Bohemian Club, Olympic Club in San Francisco, these are similar. They have lots of membership and they invite famous people in. But in all these organizations, there are echelons of people who align with each other. They find each other. And I used to think, how does it happen? How does it work that the people who are PDFs can just walk away and not be
Mm.
held accountable? People like presidents, ex-presidents can do what's been done recently, and will they go to jail?
Mm.
Uh, but this system is very nepotistic, and there's always people at different levels of corruption. What the masters know how to do is they know how to train and promote people, train and promote. So they have access to, and then top down, those people have access to people down below. So there's always a hands-off deniability. There's the people in the front, of these organizations. Like there's Zuckerberg who owns Facebook, and there's Gates who owns Microsoft. But they didn't start the organizations. They didn't have the genius to build it. They didn't have the know-how. They used other people's know-how. And when they gathered those people up and they got enough, they were able to legally take it over, take it away, and they made movies about it.
It's kind of like, the rally race where you kind of pass the baton on to people. It's I
But there's
think
always the guy who takes the cake at the end and takes the credit. He's the quarterback that claims for the
yeah,
goal, but the whole
of
team
course.
helps, but they're not even seen. They don't even get up on the podium to take the medal, right?
But I feel
But
like the cabal is, like links. It's so interlinked. And if you just, for example, look at government and media, um, they are so reliant on each other that they have to keep working in the same way upstream together, because if one goes, the other, they are so overly, it's a toxic relationship where they're reliant on each other. But
well,
that's an
it's
interesting.
bifurcated. So if one goes, part of that castle will crumble, but they'll just build another wing, and the main place is so far away from that you're not even going to see it. The reason I mentioned Gates and Zuckerberg is they're also lineage-wise part of the royal blue bloods, but they're also part of the Rothschilds' distant family. And family and people who play the game, family and people who toe the line and move into power are helped goose into power. It's just like the WEC, World Economic Forum, where they look for and find Stanford graduates, Berkeley graduates, Harvard graduates, and people who look good, people who are innovative, new, young. And these people, when you look at their mentors or mentees, they have uh, incredible backgrounds and they sound wonderful. But what you don't see is how many key positions those people have been put in worldwide. Now, Angela Merkel, French Mitterrand, right, was one. Um, Justin Trudeau. Um, and then you look at Trudeau and Clinton, they even go back to the same family lineage, which is British royalty. And it gets watered down. And I always wonder, is that really relevant? But honestly, when you look at how the power is passed around and new people can come in, new people can be genius enough, say sociopathic enough, or show a power, a penchant enough to edge their way, to be brought in, to be trusted, and they can become new dons or new kingpins, right? Um, but when we go back to like the white pope, black pope, and gray pope, those are very old family lines. When you go to the old rich goes far back. My great grandfather was, um, he was tied to old money, but he was new money. He made his own. He had $50 million in 1920s cash. which I didn't even find out till my 40s, hearing my cousin Stuart talk about this and tell all
Hopefully
kinds of
Stuart
stuff.
didn't get it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it never ended, the stuff that I learned. And a lot of it I've even forgotten. It just, I have walked so far away from that world. And even I'm so different than my family. I always was a truth seeker. When I see, that's the other thing. I have a very strange past in this way. Through my family, through my childhood, when I go to places with my father, I would turn and talk to people. It used to drive him nuts. When I went to his real estate offices, he started getting really big, and he says, "You know what? I'm going to shut those down. I don't want to be bigger than knowing everybody's name, and I want to be able to drive to every office in one day." And there were things I really respected about my dad. I respected that. I respected that a lot of people loved him. But when I went to real estate, I got the honest truth from a lot of people who remembered me and some who didn't know, "You're Jeffrey's son." And I shouldn't have said that, but anyway, that's okay. He's historic. He um, there were things I really respected about him and things I didn't. There were things I respected in business. He was very creative and innovative. He did it like nobody else. People actually loved the company. He bought an old, called it Old Rusty Door, Golden Key company that had a golden reputation. And then he came in with his innovative Stanford ideas, and he did it like nobody else. So I love that. But I used to go around and talk to these agents, and I would learn incredible things. A lot of these people had incredible careers. Then my father's friends at the Bohemian Grove, Bohemian Club. I went to the Bohemian Club countless times as a kid for events, for family things, for dinners. Some of them were boring as shit. I mean, they really were. But I would always meet somebody interesting, and not always.
What was it like there? Because,
But I met people I really respected and ones who were very cabalish. Heard things. I heard conversations. People assume that you are. I mean, my father went to Stanford. It's really not a hardcore right wing place, but they were super Republican, and I was basically the other side when I was a kid. They voted for Nixon. They voted for Reagan. All that kind of stuff, right? Now, I wasn't a for or against either side. I wasn't Republican or Democrat. I never would stoop to that kind of definition for myself because I can't. I look at the whole picture, but that's the attitude I had. So I would talk to everybody. I would talk to the janitors at my grade school. I learned incredible things from these guys and what they did in their lives. All the other kids were afraid of they thought there was one man, this huge stoic guy. It was actually twins, identical twins. I didn't know it till I started talking to him and I got to know both of them. So I call it the curtain of Oz. If you are willing to be open and talk to people, and there's a way or approach, they tell you things. And so in my life, I've met an extraordinary string of people who would confirm and reconfirm things that were told to me that I had a hard time believing, I had a hard time accepting, or I could accept that it was absolutely true, but not across the board, or could it be that deep? Ironically, my mother, who was, I mean, here both my parents met at Stanford. My mother grew up in India, speaking other languages. She grew up in the wine country first and went to St. Helena High School and then came down and met him there. Um, I I was born in Atherton, which is an extremely wealthy neighborhood, which now, if you look it up, that's Google in all of Silicon Valley. And then we moved when I was 1 year old. And I remember the house before one. I remember life there. That's part of the things that I dated. Then we came to Little Town of Mill Valley, which was, I mean, you can see it in the movie MASH. They always talk about Mill Valley. It always comes up in the movies because it's kind of a favorite. So the cabal, the movie industry, part of their second bedrooms is this Marin County, right? And so I grew up around a lot of those people. One of my best friends in high school, his mother was best friends, used to date Paul Newman. So you get to know the scuttlebutt. You get to know who's the arrogant, like Journey, the singer Journey would come in these restaurants. I worked as a waiter. I worked as a dishwasher. I worked in a Chinese restaurant washing dishes, teaching their kids English during my breaks for Philip and Helen's son. And Mr. Fu, who was this huge, tall Chinese guy, and Philip and Helen were like under 5 feet. And they paid me under minimum wage, training wage, never went up. Too embarrassed to ask them. I'd ride my bicycle there in the rain, work for them. So I wanted the real world experience. I wanted to go work on farms and ranches. I wanted to learn everything. And I wish, this is something I can say to your audience. I wish I'd taken so many amazing opportunities that were offered to me. But being a rich kid growing up there, I didn't know which way to go. I made a lot of my own money, but I was one stupid mistake. My dog got cancer and I footed the bill up to $5,000 spent on this dog for Davis to do their research, which I know now about big pharma, and they did nothing to help the dog. And I had to put her to sleep. And I made other mistakes, big mistakes on money, trusting people. A friend of mine stole my parents' car. While I was there at his house, I went looking for them. I ran out. It was a Ford Mustang. Unfortunately, my mom wanted a convertible, but she couldn't find it. So we got the hard top. It's 64 Mustang. And I ran out, took a full dive in the window as he's going down his driveway. I said, hey, pull over, stop driving. He wouldn't stop driving. I said, give me the wheel. He's on the windy road going up the hill. I'm like, dude, you're out of control. And he crashed. And I took the blame for that. And I ended up footing the bill for it. So, when you're a nice kid, you get taken advantage of. When you care, but you also end up with, I traveled, I ended up invited to people's homes, their dinner tables, in settings that blew my mind. Because I was
On
willing.
that note, Jazz, I just want to
So,
pause you for
yeah,
1 minute. I just want to ask the audience and people watching if you can drop any questions in.
yeah. So
And I'm just going to keep my eye on those. And I just want to bring some questions in because
I want to
something
get
I
away from my
really
life too, and
want.
I want to talk to you about what I see in what I've learned in the organizations,
Yeah, that
because
would be great.
that's when I started talking about going these places, traveling to countries. I didn't do enough. I wish I'd done more. But in the people I met, and then have been on the background helping produce Monique's radio show for 7 years, and being on every one of these shows, sometimes even with the guests, but these whistleblowers and these incredible minds, and then meeting people in my private life, I got to piece together that impossible picture that never made sense. Like, how can this be true, but also this one be true? How can they have power? How do these guys, these PDFs, stay in the police departments? And now I
Can
feel
you
like I
see
understand it.
how this is something that you hear of these cover-ups? I mean, we've got it going on in the UK at the moment with some awful things that have been covered up by the police, and young girls have lost their childhoods, and actually some have they've unalived themselves. It's been that horrific. But
Yes.
sometimes it's really hard to get your head around how certain elites, um, people of, the cabal can do such horrific things, and then processes that involve so many people get covered
Okay.
up time and time again. Can you tell me what you've seen? Because this is genuinely something that I really struggle with to try and get my head around sometimes, and I
Okay.
know about the corruption.
It's like there's so much I want to deliver, and I'm sorry if I go on the story tangents too much. So
Don't worry, I'll keep pulling you back in, Jeff. It's okay.
sure. This is what I want to deliver to the audience here are concepts and ideas and things you can try to look up. Maybe I'll reference things like Project Paperclip or Project Bluebird, Montauk, things like that. But if you do your research and you look at history and you do your research on this subject and you look at history, but don't just look at history, then try to find out the deeper histories, the stuff you weren't told. Because um, I knew a professor at Sonoma State, he wrote a book called Lies My History Teacher Told Me. And he wrote a book about all these lies through our American history. And I had an anthropology professor who told us a whole different version of the Columbus discovered America and the worldview and who was buzzing around the world that discovering things. So to roll back also to my grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather my grandfather was translating scrolls from these Indian caves with these monks. And interestingly enough, in these old caves, they'd guarded these secrets for many, many years. And they had actually trained black Burmese cats to live in these caves. And if they didn't recognize someone, different smell coming in the cave, they would jump up on these stoops up about like 8, 9 feet up. jump down on the person's face with their claws here and use the back claws to claw their face and claw their eyes out. But he was translating the scrolls, and through all this and the studies my grandmother did, she studied Madame Blavatsky, who personally I never really liked. She tried showing me a picture of her once, and what do you see? That was one time I didn't tell the truth to my grandmother. But through all this stuff, I learned a knowledge that later would come back when my brother started studying quantum physics and stuff. She'd say, this table's not really here. This is all just energy. She told me about ancient knowledge in Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, but from like a standpoint of what was stories being told in it. And also what she said is, if you pluck any religion out of the ground and look at it, if you look at its roots, the roots should be the same. But what they do on the tree, what they do up here is different. And I think that all the modern religions have been hijacked from us. I think they've hijacked us, taken the power away. Because if you study spiritual knowledge, if you study sacred knowledge, ancient knowledge, I'm trying to think of the other terms for it, the flower of life, the secret flower of life, which is inscribed on every continent in ancient cultures all around the world, which also includes pyramids, line on the ley lines. And what this ancient secret of the flower of life is, it is a 2D description that can be raised to 3D that is part of a description of the model of the universe, which expounds into things like Mandelbrot sets and the spirals in the universe, like a fern and a sunflower. This is the math of the universe. This is the construction of the universe. This is the construction of our world. Well, the cabal people study the same stuff, but from a different point of view. So what you want to study is you want to study sociopaths, okay, and psychopaths. Sociopaths don't care about you or me. And I met these people. I had conversations with them, and sometimes it curled the hair on the back of my neck. I met people who would support the Nazis. They're here today. Now, things I've learned about the Nazis and Germans are very different. Even these people I were talking to didn't know the things I know now that I didn't know then, okay? Because they were placed in power. The Russian, Soviet, what they called communist government was placed in power. And it comes back to the same people. The same people set up the international banking systems, the Federal Reserve, which that was called Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed. There's no reason for us to have the Fed. There's no reason for us to borrow from private families in the United States. We can have our own bank. We should have our own national bank. But instead, we're convinced to go over and over into debt. So this all ties in for the cabal. And I think people know the things that I'm referencing. And when you understand how far back this goes, that it goes back to the development of these banks. And who placed the Nazis in power? Who created the Reichstag with the, blame this retarded kid that they put it on, and that Hitler got into power. They almost didn't make it, but magically they got in. Hitler was a short, Jewish descent, Austrian, not very good painter. He wanted to go to art school. He was refused, but he had passion. He could yell, he could scream, and so they need a front man. They need a front man. There were a lot of generals who didn't necessarily agree with him, but when you get that big a machine, people go along. Okay, so that reminds me of another story for another show that I learned from a guy who tried to recreate the experiment with grade school kids because they didn't believe in what happened with the Nazis, and he actually recreated a situation he had to defuse. That he recreated this whole paradigm for them, and it shows how easily people can be duped. Now, take that Nazi idea, for instance, go to the United States. If you look at Vietnam War, the Bay of Tonkin, total complete lie, never happened. We were told that they sunk our ship, and that this was a war, and of course the cabal, fingers on both sides, playing both ends. So what I say is we don't have a two-puppet system in the United States or anywhere. We have a two-party system, not a two-party system, a two-puppet system. So you have the shadow fighters in Indonesia, or you have the French puppets where the policeman's hitting the criminal and he's hitting him back, and the audience is laughing, they're loving it. But they're not seeing what's going on behind. My dad did puppet shows, we used to help him, and behind there's a lot of stuff going on. But then there's the writers of the show, the scripters of the show, they're not even behind the stage. So Then, okay, so we have Bay of Tonkin, then we have Pearl Harbor. They knew they were coming. The code breakers had gotten the information. It was stymied. They told to stand down. Even the admiral said, "What are we doing? We've woken a sleeping giant." So you got to understand the cabal gets its orders through on both ends, and then it makes money on both ends. And what it makes is out of chaos, out of dividing us, divide and conquer, out of Black Lives Matter and the good old boys and these people fighting each other in the streets with garbage can lids, and they think they're going for a cause. What they're actually doing is helping to further. They're not using critical thinking. They're not really integrating. They're not trying to make peace, make friends, or gain influence on the other side. They're trying to do it because they think they need to grandstand and do like fight. When you trip into that arena, you are playing their game, George Soros's game, and Henry Kissinger. I mean, look at the man. Who was Kissinger? Why was he so powerful? Why were they all listening to him? You have to look back at all these things historically, then look again, put it together, realize that whatever model you think you know, even when you look at the torn apart history and you find the back door, that even isn't at the full level. It's an integrative web. Okay. So one of the things I tell people is name a communist country. And then I have them, they name a country and I say, not. And they argue with me. Cuba, Russia, Soviet Union, uh, China, they're not communist. Look at them. They're not communist. Communism is the most beautiful word in the world because it comes from communal, community, commune. What does commune mean? Look up the root words. This is what the cabal does. They hijack vocabulary. They use vocabulary. If you look at spelling means spell making. Words have influence. The pen is more powerful than the sword. The cabal winds you up with everything. There's great lectures. As a matter of fact, I could probably through
Well,
conversations and time put together links for your audience, how you can look at the US legal system, how you can look at the IRS, how you can look at all the legal words that bind you, where you end up as a birth certificate with capital letters. Your name is counted as chattel or actual property of the United States, and your lifetime earning capacity is equated by actuaries who look at how much the US can borrow from the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank looks at those birth certificates and Social Security system as the collateral to pay back the taxes that are borrowed. We're paying back the taxes that are borrowed. People say, I'm a taxpayer. You see it in the movies all the time. They train us on this verbiage. But what are the taxes? They're interest on the debt. We're never paying off the debt. And their interest for things borrowed, like amazingly what Doge was finding, they have interwoven how they sow their influence and money. Same thing as how they put the Nazis in power. Now, when you go to the Nazis, look at George Bush. George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA. Well, what happened? The US had progressed to the point where, Johnson, CIA, putting in things like the signing the charter for the IRS and all for Kennedy's death. So if you go back, to how the IRS was created and how this whole system was created, and then you fast forward to the Bush family, now a head of CIA becomes president. Well, what did the CIA do for years? Look historically. They toppled governments, they influenced governments, they assassinated leaders. If they couldn't assassinate them, they would corrupt them, they would bribe them. If they couldn't corrupt them, they try to smear them and get them out of office. If they couldn't smear them out of office, they would fund, like the Contras, these rebel groups that were US backed, to overthrow them. And then if they couldn't do that, they would do whatever they could to influence or weaken the country. And if you look historically, there's famous whistleblowers come forward and said, I did these programs. This is what we did. This is the master manipulation. Now take George Bush Sr., go back to Herbert Walker Bush. Where did he get his money? He worked with the guy who was laundering the money for the Germans out of Germany during the war. And when they folded up ship, Herbert Walker Bush used that as his seed money and then put it into oil money. So all these things are tied together.
Mm.
When
Do
you go
you
back
think
far
it's
enough,
also,
yeah,
Gaz, do you think it's possible that people are in the cabal without knowing that's what it's called? Because from my experience,
people are in it so many levels, they don't even know what, they just know they're getting their bribe or they got their position of power. Maybe they're not really in a bribe level, but they're getting all these bennies. Like these are the people I grew up around, okay, like senators' daughters and kids. I went to school with Newsom. I knew him not well. I knew him. Uh,
or
he
you.
was well, I mean, I also went to school with, okay, so my parents were, family was good friends with the Feinstein family, very old San Francisco, very influential family. Feinstein actually went to Stanford. Um, there, Newsom's related to the Feinstein family. I can't remember how, but yeah, I mean, it's also nepotistic and
Mm.
interwoven. It's incredible. My family knew judges and such. And in when you know, that's also something. Bohemian Grove, Bohemian Club, these are some of the most influential families, old money families in the world. They got together, they started with 2,000 members, and my great great grandfather was one of those original members. I'm not sure, I haven't really got the full history on whether he was part of the starting, but then my grandfather was a member, and my father was a member, and his brother was a member, and he asked us, "Do you want to be members?" And I said, "Well, yeah, maybe someday." But I also had gone there and met people, and I was really reticent. I mean, there were people I met who were amazing, really incredible, beautiful people. You start to be able to smell and see who has ethics. No, they may not be perfect. They may be in the, like one of my dad's good friends was a stockbroker. Okay, the stock market, if you really understand how it works and what it's all about. And his guy had the race boat, the world speed record, and he started later in life um, running the 100-mile races in the Sierras. And then he got my, okay, so the guy, my father's uh, divorced my mom, had an affair with his good friend's wife, who that guy was uber wealthy. He had the largest timber interest in California, redwood groves and others. And he was listed as the most, when he divorced, he was listed as the most eligible bachelor in San Francisco by the San Francisco Society. Um, and I went to his mansion with a big, the Scream, this huge statue. He had all this famous modern art throughout his house, a Bose system on every floor at the time. It was pretty, and in Pacific Heights overlooking the bay. Um, these people don't know how interwoven they are. When you look deeper and you look farther, there are string pullers. Now, this gets to how are we affected? When you look at um, Project Bluebird or what's it called, mind control studies with the
MK
CIA,
Ultra?
MK Ultra. There was They were experimenting with a lot of different things, including a lot of different drugs.
Did
And
you
one of those drugs,
see, Jazz, did you see MK Ultra being done on people growing up? Have you got experience with that? Because we've
I had a girlfriend in college, and her father was a teacher at Sonoma State. He was in the psychology department. He was authorized by the government in the 50s and 60s to be administering LSD and do these studies. The studies were done on campus. It was one of the adjunct campuses all over the country that these doctors doing studies in LSD patients. There was some pretty sick, grotesque stuff done to American citizens, many of whom were the throwaways, the prostitutes, the criminals, the mentally insane, the retarded, the committed. But what they also did was they took regular people, came in for headaches, and then they took them for more, and they give sessions, and they do shock therapies, and then they say, "Oh, we need to commit them," and they would literally take them away from their family, and they would do radiation and cancer studies and drug studies and electric shock therapy and try to see if they could Manchurian candidate them. And this is all historic. It's come out. And the guy who ran the main program for psychology and ran the psych ward and committed a lot of Americans, he was working directly with a lot of the Project Paperclip Nazis that came over to help in these programs. It wasn't just rocket scientists, which is what they tout. You know, the V5 rocket was a Nazi scientist who brought the largest rocket in the world from the Nazi regime. The Nazi regime was amazing from this standpoint, a technical standpoint. They had Germans still are today, the mind of engineers. They had advanced weapons. And what we're not seeing is the stuff that was hidden under the carpet that was swept away. It's very interesting. The microwaves were being developed in Nazis, and they were using this as weaponry. But to go forward, so that was one example. Like I'm saying, I met these people. So he had done these studies. He was telling me things about the program. He said they all enjoyed taking LSD, and they had continued to. He would trip as I knew him, and he let his daughter trip. And but they knew the truth about these things. Okay, so like if you study Paul Stamets, who's a mycologist, famous world mycologist, he talks about mycology in incredible ways, what he's developed with mushrooms, from solutions for oil that digest in completely tertiary petroleum products, and you can grow food in it, or oil spills, to carpenter bees or carpenter ants. He's developed mycology that can work with insects and protect other things. But he also talks, I mean, I heard him say one time about portobello mushrooms. He said, I'll never eat them. This is why, the interviewer, he says, I can't say. But he said he basically was intimating that they're deadly and over time. And he says, there's one time I heard him say, I can't say, my life will be put in jeopardy. Like, whoa, that's from Paul Stamets, who also talks about psychedelics. So a lot of sophisticated minds now are coming forward, and especially now that's becoming more legal, to say that this is not only a mind control thing, it's also may be responsible for developing human intelligence, that it may also be an answer. So a lot of Silicon Valley's microdosing on LSD, mushrooms. People take it a lot for recreation, but the thing about it is now it's also a psychedelic tourism, I'd call it, where they go down to Central America or other places, or even places where it's technically illegal, and they do DMT or ayahuasca to have vision quests. Most of the people I've met doing this brag about it, and it's just like people bragging about saying, I'm a such level Reiki master. I started under this person. This person's my guru. Like it means something. Like it makes them more important.
It
But
kind of
people
feels like we're all kind of 20 years behind the cabal, because that, and you were saying that they have access to, or
we're
maybe
not
not
20 years
access,
behind
but
them. We're right next to them. So this is a difference in perspective. The more you understand, the more it'll get dark. Even more depressed you can get, or more obsessed, or more redirected. And that's just one thing they want, because it also gives them power. Just like knowing about 9/11, if you really study that stuff. I mean, I knew when I watched it go down, I saw this stuff and I'm like, that is controlled demolition. That must be energy weapons. But when you look at the thing that goes poof, 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 okay, that's controlled demolition. But when you watch huge pieces of concrete being ejected out, which is not possible in a pancake effect, they're not thrown up and outward. They would be falling downward. And a pancake effect would have left a huge tower of pancakes and a big pile of rubble. It didn't, it went into the ground. But these things turn to dust in midair. And then you have the wobbling steel that's left there, and it literally fades to dust in the air. Then it goes on and on for the Pentagon, no plane, blurry camera. It's the most defended building on Earth. It was the largest building on Earth. It has automatic weapons. I know this from friends who worked in the Pentagon. I had friends who were special forces and SEAL teams, went into political stuff, then went back into service. But they have rockets that come up out of the roof and will shoot down any plane that doesn't have a military transponder. And when they have like private airplanes that gone over that, they know exactly who it is. They fly up jets next to it. They try to land that guy. But if it looks like it's going for the building, it would be poof dust. Instead, you got this big hole in the side. Oh yeah, plane parts. Come on. I didn't see plane parts. I didn't see the wings tipping in that thing. And it happened to be the wing that was being remodeled. I mean, then there's the Pennsylvania one where there's no plane part whatsoever. But they find the wallet. Same thing. They find the passports of these terrorists. Well, funny enough, Monique and I know people who were part of these programs, and one of them says in the FBI, well, we're tasked with finding bin Laden. And he says, every time we find where he was, the CIA has already moved him. Well, look at SEAL Team 6. What happened to him? Died in a helicopter crash. Interesting. These things are so interwoven. We're not behind the cabal. We're right there with them. This is the myth. What I see freedom. One is freedom of thought. Don't believe everything you believe. Don't believe everything you're told. Don't know everything you know. Just know it for the moment. Then abrogate it to the next thing. Put it together. Let it go. Put back together. Be confounded sometimes. What you'll find is that all these things, interesting enough, that could be, I can go deep into topics between the occult, wizardry, um, things like affirmations, why they work, creation, creating reality. We all are not in the same reality. We are all living our own reality parallel to who we think we know, like our family members. So we have a similar background. But your reality is constantly changing. But those people who live a regular life, like a farmer, they get really in tune to the land. They don't have as much of the stress and sicknesses that we do in big cities, right? As the Native Americans used to say, that they one of the things they said was, these white people coming are psychologically sick. They are they need our help. They're sick because they're disconnected from the Great Spirit, from the land. They're disconnected from their own spirit, their own souls. In New Zealand, the Maori, Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, those Maoris, when they met the whites, they called them a term which basically means, I was told, without breath, because they would, when they greet, they would exchange and they would take the shoulders and breathe each other's breath. They believed they were sharing spirit, but they felt that these people were without spirit. So if you look at these indigenous cultures, we think they had everything wrong, but you go back in their myths and you unwind them, and they had stuff attuned to sacred knowledge. They had stuff attuned to alien civilizations visiting. Back to my grandmother telling me about these scrolls, and she says, you have no idea. Don't believe all these things you're told in school. She said there have been ancient civilizations, not once, but many times, over and over on this planet. 250,000 years, 500,000 years. And that's where she talked about the Upanishads. And later you see on Ancient Aliens or History Channel or documentaries about this, about how the Upanishads are talking about things that look like nuclear wars and flying ships. And when you look at the Egyptian artwork, and you look at Persepolis, and you look at the Native Americans like Aztec, Inca, Toltec, I studied those in anthropology. And they always like to say, oh, they sacrificed and they played these basketball games. But they're really not telling you. I mean, look at the Mayan calendar. It became a big, big deal. But it was just told to be symbology. Mayan calendar talked about a new age. But everybody said, oh, it means a disaster. It's paradigm shifts, okay? There's people who hold this knowledge. So the Native American society now is starting to come forward. They're starting to say, we could not tell this. We were not allowed to tell this. We were protectors of this information. So one of the things Hopi and Anasazi before the Hopi and the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian civilizations, if you look these things up, pretty amazing. Okay, largest pyramid on Earth, not in Cheops. It's in Arizona. It's a part of the, but it's a flat top, so they don't count it because it's not as tall. The point being, there's, when you go into the interwoven knowledge of these things, when you see that some of these Hopi civilizations were set up to match constellations, but they're over 150 miles, when they start saying that we call them our star brothers and sisters, these people are visiting our culture. You look at the Kachina dolls and you understand more about the Kachina dolls when you look at the cave paintings that literally show people with these coronas or helmets and instrumentation. I mean, there are so many depths of things that obviously are there and been stripped from us and rewoven and retold. History was hijacked. When I studied anthropology, so a famous anthropologist, I don't remember specifics, but he was down in Africa trying to prove that Africans had small brains and were less than human. And he was putting forth a lot of information along this lines, which was of the education of the day. There were enough people of influence that that was believed to be true. However, what he did was he actually had some things destroyed with it. He was down there. He was visited some ancient ruins, which were later revisited. And what he did was he tried to cover up the evidence. The Africans were actually smelting iron while the Europeans were throwing rocks at each other. Now, Europeans meaning geographically, right? That they actually had sophisticated weaponry and sophisticated methods that they were able to smelt iron when Europeans were doing copper. Iron takes a lot hotter kilns. What these younger anthropologists did is they went back and pieced together from the oral history, the oral knowledge of the people, and he actually built this thing and made it work, because he was trying to say all these implements that were being found could not have been built by the Africans. Okay. The Egyptians, of course, were not Africans, even though on the African continent. But of course they're not. What is an African? People say, I'm African American. What does that mean? Really? Okay. There's, just like India, just like Iran, there are multiple cultures, multiple languages, multiple lineages. I mean, Hitler loved the Aryan race. Well, all the Persians, they come from Aral Mountains and Aryan race. My grandmother used to talk about the blue bloods. She said in India, there were tall people in the mountains who were blue bloods. She told me stories of people she'd met and things that I couldn't even believe. And then I'd see this stuff on the History Channel. I'd see it on the Ancient Aliens. And I'm like, whoa, that's the same stuff she talked about. Then we start seeing some of these Nephilim and the expanded skulls down in South America. Our history is so interwoven. It goes so deep. There's so much more than the freaking cabal. I'm sorry, but if I start swearing, I'll string them out.
No, and on that note, Jazz, I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
how prevalent was witchcraft in the cabal?
Okay. So that is one aspect that would be, shall we say, reserved for the special initiates. So if you look at Bush and Bush, they were part of the Skull and Bones Society, right? So these famous universities have these kind of make fun. Boys get to go out and be Boy Scouts and put on little hoodies and scare each other and do rituals and fires. That's what we're told. That's the same thing as Bohemian Club, right? Bohemian Grove. They go out there for camping. This is what big boys do. They're rich and famous. They get away from the fame. They're all equal together. And the motto of Bohemian Grove is weaving spiders come not here. And I was always told that was meant you're not supposed to do business deal. Ah, come on. You think business deals don't get done on the golf course? You don't think they get done in country clubs? Then you're naive. Okay. So what you have is these kind of networks where deals are being done. But deals are done with those you trust the most, closest to your chest, with your largest fortunes and your largest items. What you end up doing is building alliances and cabals that protect each other. So you have deeper and deeper sets. Now, there's things I guess I can't say vocabularically on this show, but when you go deeper, it gets pretty dark. And there are things where people are taking the lives of innocents, sometimes very young innocents, sometimes newborn, months old, uh, 6, 10, for various reasons. And there is a
And
whole
is
market
this, 'cause I think
of
it's really
people.
important. Is this
Yeah.
something that you've read? Is this something that you've been told directly? Or how does this
Okay.
factor into your experience, just to let the
So
audience know?
where this comes from is I heard these stories and I could believe it happened, but I couldn't. When I was told later the amounts and the prevalence, I was shocked, and I can't say disbelief, but I had a hard time putting it together. As more people came forward in my life and I put together more history of the technology, you know, Antarctica and Project High Jump and these famous generals and some of the people in my, that I met in my lifetime. Then we go forward to whistleblowers, like my friend Vic Starzik, who's long passed away now. He died of AIDS. He was Russian was his first language. So he was a radio operator in Turkey, overlooking the sea, look across from Russia, and he would listen to and operate radar stations. And he says, you'd be surprised how many jets were shot down, private jets, and it was hushed up. What really happened? He said the MiGs would take off across the sea and come right for his station. and they would lock their weapons, and he didn't know if he had seconds left to live, and then they'd pass over just saying, we know you're there. This is a game played, right? So Vic also ended up spending time at Area 51 type sites where they work in microwaves and experimenting with the power of microwave weapons. And one of the things they did while he was working on this project was they build these steel towers with radar towers, and then they have jets come and melt the towers. Well, this is, I met Vic in the 80s, and this is in the 60s. He was doing this stuff. And then I also met a friend of my father's who told us all these amazing things in the 70s. And he told me later, everything I'm telling you is in the public domain. Because I asked him, I said, how can you tell us this? Won't they be listening to you when they, he says, well, you're right. I probably would disappear. And I asked him what would happen. And this is a shortcut for a long story about our dinner with him. And my family went to the living room, and I couldn't stop talking to this guy. And I asked him, I said, well, why are you telling me this stuff? He says, well, everything I'm telling you is in the public domain. He says, it's not in the library. You have to know where to look for it. It may be hard to find, but it's out there. So I know it's already out there. I can tell you about it. He said, but I've seen things you won't believe. He says, take your imagination. He says, go farther. He says, take that and go farther, go beyond that. He says, and I said, I don't know. I got a pretty good imagination, right? He says, no, go farther than that. Now he's telling me about satellite technology. He was telling me about that the only thing keeping back was supercomputers. He's talking about tracking every U.S. Soldier and every Russian soldier from space, that eventually we can track every U.S. citizen, that we're listening to all the phone calls, that they were collecting the credit cards. And he says, keep in mind, I retired a long time ago. I said, really? Like what? He says, like well over 10 years ago. That would have put him in 1961, 1958 is what I guessed. I wish I could have gotten more specifics. I wish I could have seen, I always thought I'd see the guy again, right? Fast forward, that's when I had, for instance, my electronics professor, who had run, he literally had run the R&D program for Hewlett Packard. And then when it split to Agilent, he ran Agilent, which is the major research arm. And they had done for many years secret programs and government programs, top secret programs. And he was telling us stuff about how far the technology had gone. And he says the same thing, telling you stuff that's already out there. He reconfirmed everything this guy told me, and then expounded on top of that. So on the occult, I grew up in San Francisco. There was the Temple of Set in San Francisco. I met some of these people. I knew some of these people. I knew a lot of the artists and kind of homeless that were hanging out in Sausalito and living on this old paddle wheeler. It was an old like river paddle wheeler they had that's kind of sunk, and it was sitting there with a whole paddle, and all the homeless or the people that kind of taken it over as sovereign nation. They did the on Alcatraz, the Native Americans came and declared it a sovereign territory and took it over for a while. I grew up around these kind of people, hippies in Haight-Ashbury. When my little town, I used to go down and talk to the artists at the art festivals, and we get into these pretty hairy, interesting conversations. They start smoking a joint, do you mind? I'm like, no. They'd even offer it to me. I'm like, 7 years old, 10 years old. I'm like, no, dude, no thanks. But I respected that they respected me enough to talk to me like an adult. And so when you hear these things, you also hear stories that people got out. Now, fast forward to Monique's radio show, we interviewed a lot of whistleblowers, people who'd gone inside, people who had, I was told stories from my father's Bohemian Grove members about different parts. Then later I heard about cremation of care ceremony, which I'd heard about all my life. I went to Reverend Cecil Williams, his church, Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. What a trip that is if you want to go. They had these psychedelic amoebas going to music in the background, talk about mind control. And he starts talking about the Bohemian Grove. And he's saying all these things. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's true. But I don't know about that one. And he's claiming that, these guys, and he talks about weaving spiders coming out here, and this is where the elite make their deals. And I kind of knew that was true, but then he was stepping off the edge to this bit about the cremation carrot chop and sacrifice, taking officials out of the life, that I couldn't believe it was true. Then I look back later and I realized that, true or not, the audience of this people, the rich and famous, and all the famous and incredible artists and minds that are invited as adjunct members or discounted members because they're budget, and all the full members who would be the, Ray Kroc, owner of McDonald's. I saw him, his big, he had a huge, it was like a mega yacht, but it was on wheels. And these people, my dad pissed next to Nixon on a tree and saw all the various presidents. So some of these people I would talk to, and what I realized is when you look at mind control, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. Somebody's doing this in the background, but they're doing the whole ceremony subconsciously, psychologically, like the mentalist. If you look up the mentalist shows and how mentalists influence people, it's mind blowing what they're able to accomplish, what they're able to do. Like a goat in the trunk of this car and these keys, and then they go through the whole deal, and that's it. It's like they planted the seeds for all the answers and all things, and they influence people. It's kind of like we see hypnosis in the movies and we wonder, how is that really possible? But then you see it in a show. Okay, now look at advertising. Do you want to watch? Do you want a brand? Do you prefer a brand? This is a honed science for thousands of years, hundreds of years. Since the 20s, 30s, 40s, they've been doing the science of advertising. Now weave in MK Ultra, weave in all these programs to figure out how to influence you. If you look at all the Hollywood movies, start noticing things. This is where you wake up. You start applying what you know, what you've seen to everyday life. Not all the time, you'll go crazy. But when you sit and watch a movie, and don't do this because I do it, unfortunately, and it drives my friends nuts. Oh, product placement. Oh, check that out. Did you see that in the background? Fast forward to COVID. No, oops. Go back. Okay. Now, 5, 6, 7 years, 2 years, 1 year before, what do we got? The Da Vinci Code. Watch that movie. Listen to the keywords. Look at the background. Look at all the coffins covered in red in this scene next to the cathedral, right? Look at what they're talking about. Look at how the billionaire talks. It is always this save the world thing. Look at Mission Impossible and the last two, right? What was it? I just saw the second movie. It's great. I love it. I love those things. But crucifix key for AI. And what does it unhook? What can it do? These vocabulary from COVID are all contained in Contagion, The Silence, all these movies, what they have to do to survive. And it's always done to the extreme, so we think of it as just a movie. But when you come back and it actually happens in life, you're like, oh, okay, well, I've seen worse. So you're not really aware, you're not really seeing it, you're not really coding it in. All of you people, I'm sorry, but during COVID, all of you people who took that shot to help your friends and help each other, look at the congressional hearings now. Look at who's come forward. These are the same doctors who are being shut down. Some of the ones we interviewed on Money's show, they were talking about how harmful this was, what it does. Look at mRNA technology. I knew about this from a friend who was one of the first people, who's a real estate agent. He had severe disabilities. Most people didn't know this. He was in extreme pain all day long. I've
I
worked with a lot
think
of
too, Jazz, I
Yep.
also think it's important that, just from my experience, when it comes to something like COVID, I think a lot of people felt highly pressured into it. I mean, I was 8 months pregnant at the time and was
No lie,
literally
no lie.
told.
But take this moment right now, because people will polarize. They'll get mad at me. I don't care. I don't believe that. I don't care. Nobody cares what you believe. Only you care what you believe. And what you believe, it's not important. It doesn't matter. Because what you believe will change if you have an open mind, if you use critical thinking, if you listen to different sources, if you look for credible sources, if you question authority and you look at the sources they've given you, and then you start finding other sources, your jaw starts to drop and you can put together the pieces. You start seeing these clearer windows into events, into control factors, into the cabal. You start seeing the larger machinations that they've done. When you unwind all the US wars, all of these things were preventable. All of them were unnecessary, and most of them were built on a lie. And what happened? The military industrial complex, they got rich. The families got rich. I know families are involved in this stuff, plastics business, these different things. And they would make money off deals, sweetheart deals. Congress members, they get in there, then they pass stuff around. This is, wake up, people. This is how the world works. It's how other countries work. But when it's the third world country, when it's a second world country, when it's Afghanistan, Iraq, India, Philippines, Indonesia, bribery. bakshish. It's normal. Police pulling you over. Mexico, you got to figure out if you bribe them, they're honest, you might go to jail. If they're not, then you got to pay up, payola. And I've had friends make big mistakes of carrying all the money and they had to give it all up. But this is how the world works. Now, apply that to our sanitized, perfect, democratic, and free society with free speech and freedom of, well, you guys have lost it. I mean, in England.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Or
horrific.
police, or I mean, I really respect. I was in Scotland and different. I came down to England a little bit. I really like that you could talk to them. When I was in England in the 80s, the police didn't have guns. I saw some guy come out in the street, we're in the bus, and the policeman starts blowing a whistle. Out of nowhere, all these bobbies come. They're piling. The guy's like 5, 6, 7, 10. Pretty soon there's 20 all around, and there's 7 on the guy. I'm like, this doesn't happen in the U.S.
No,
Right?
the police now are too busy arresting people for sending tweets
So
on X.
look at where we've come. Look at how it's gone. Look at how we're played. COVID is a master stroke of the cabal. And it was talked about. And we talked to many, many whistleblowers, giving us different versions or even the full version, even the project, was it? That's Project 2025. It was, what's the one? Actually, it's it's the Gates Foundation, or the Foreman. Anyway, I'm mixing my stuff up because I'm going too fast. They actually
Well,
laid
let's
out
bring some questions. Let's bring some questions in.
who were part of this, who told us, we were told, like one guy I met actually in Istanbul at a playground, and I'm trying to tell him about this stuff and tell him what I know. He says, you don't have to tell me all this stuff. I know. I said, really? He was part of large finance and putting in big tunnels and things throughout Europe. And he said, we had a meeting and they were telling us this was coming. And one of my friends said, do you like to travel? He says, well, yeah, I kind of. He says, do all your traveling the next 2 years because we're going to shut the world down. You won't be able to go anywhere. Meeting where they talked about the shot and that they were going to reduce population and control, get people to take this. How are you going to get them to do it? Don't worry, we got this handled. We got a whole scenario and they're going to be begging for it. So this was actually a medical experiment on the world that was a violation of the Nuremberg Treaty, very clear violation of the Nuremberg Treaty. Look it up. An experiment where they said it was safe, but they can't say something's safe until 10 years of valid studies have been done. But if you look at all the studies of Big Pharma, you listen to RFK, you go back in history, you start finding out what they're talking about now, even in congressional hearings, which finally we're getting this on mainstream TV, but you have to sit down and watch all these. They're not that boring actually, but they're long in congressional hearings, telling about most of these studies, even for vaccines, were not even valid studies, or they were done by the pharma and they were cooked, booked, or baked. They were shortcutted. They were not even, they don't meet the standard. So even the statistics, because I was taught about polio, how great it was to save so many people. And I had friends who had polio. I had friends who have arms like this because they had polio at birth and they were deformed. Little, and I worked a lot with the handicapped. So I worked with people who made amazing lives and didn't complain about the pain, and they did amazing things. They taught me a lot, but all these people were deformed by the money makers, the irresponsible, the manipulators who sold us Teflon, fluoride. Biggest American environmental lawsuit in US history was killing cows, farmers, polluting lands, and they found a way to bury it by hiring dentists and experts to say it was safe and it would help with cavities. Do some research on that subject. Go down these, now all these rabbit holes I'm talking about, eventually all these rabbit holes are the same scenario. They're interconnected, they're intertwined. If you look at the systems, if you understand how it goes, if you talk about the deep networks, the ones who go into the occult or the satanic, these are people who are willing to go to those levels, and they've proven it, they've shown it, and they find, promote, and bring in those people willing. They can be at many levels. They could just be a police officer or a police chief. They might never know the upper levels, but they have a level of compromise. And these are things that we had whistleblowers who talked about going to these events, and they bowed out at the last minute. But what they get people lured into, taking drugs or having ritzy experiences, the same way that young girls and young boys, especially young girls, are lured into mega billionaires' yachts or being models or starting to do different things. And then, like with Epstein, or on a boat, like, just give them a massage and you can have more. They look for corruptible. Some people willingly jump in till they find they're too deep. If they want to get out, this is when you're bought, you're owned, you're threatened, your family's threatened. A lot of these poor girls, they threaten their families. They say, you want to go back to your family, you do, we're going to expose you, you're a drug addict, you look at you now. When these poor girls are spent in the worst portions of the systems, they've started at very young ages, sometimes from, like I said, the wet diapers stages, or young kids or young teens, doesn't matter. It also, some of them are in poor countries like Romania. Those guys are in the worst conditions. Some are the fancy, high-end, expensive prostitutes that, may have it pretty good, and maybe they're covered over their scars. They don't show anymore. Some may not be deep drug addicts, but when the ones that are in those kind of programs, that deep abuse, are spent, they're no longer useful at a certain age, unless they become cagers themselves, unless they become promoters or groomers. But if not, or if they resist or they're weak, they can be sold for organ harvesting. So you think, oh, this person needs a kidney. Oh, they go, where'd you get it? How can you prove it? China, look at China. It's a
Yeah,
system. So
just
yeah.
before we go down a tangent, I'm really aware that the viewers I've got their questions stacking up, so I just want to
Okay, go
make
ahead.
sure I put these to you.
Sure, yeah.
So David wants to know, is there underground tunnels?
Oh God, yes. Uh, the thing about it is, humans have always built tunnels. If you go to ancient societies, ancient cities, you go to Cappadocia, ancient Rome, Greece, they built underground tunnels. They sometimes built the underground cities. They sometimes did it, say, for fortifications. They did it for ritualistic things. The Hopi, Navajo, and Anasazi, they built underground networks for either, as we know from modern studies of pyramids and crop circles, maybe for a high electronics or high sophistication. So if you fast forward, militaries have built tunnels and bunkers. Look at the incredible amounts of money that are laundered and pumped through the US. We say they go to charitable organizations. Look at Doge. Take that money. They go into black projects. Black projects are unaccountable, not even to the presidents, not even to the military. I guarantee you that there are tunnel networks, and there are people like Alex Jones and then others less well known who have videoed going in these things that go miles. There's also underground mines, salt mines, other kinds of mines. These things are gigantic rooms. But are
Have
there
you ever
tunnels that
been
go
in
across
them?
the country? Well, we've talked to whistleblowers who claim that they know about hypersonic tunnels that go across the U.S. and network. We know that some of the military bases and such are connected. There's underground high-speed rails that go. This has been talked about, but there's
Did
some
any
that
of
talk
the
about.
houses of people in the cabal have tunnels or any kind
Oh,
of
now I
interconnecting?
was shown as a kid sometimes that the fun thing was to show this secret thing in the study, and it goes through this room. There were, let's see, what was the house? I had different friends had these houses that had like back things between the walls. So you could get in there and go between the walls and then come out another little door, another room into the attic, and then out. This was famous during when this is what I'm saying. Look at the windows that show you the prevalence and the usefulness and how they're used. There's the Prohibition days. There's the Deep South. There's tunnels that the walls make under the wall for the U.S. There's ones that one of my friends, the police officer in Ross, he's since passed away. He used to go to underground things for 2 years at a time, where he would what's it called? He'd go into these organizations, big drug organizations, and one of the projects he went on, he told me, was about a drug operation in Colombia with an underground drug factory in an airport, strip airport on the surface. He said they spent 2.5 years going over this thing, mapping it out, and he was there on a paramilitary mission to go in because he'd done special forces, and he was all in his gear. Everybody's ready. It's 2:30 in the morning. They're going to hit this thing before dawn. And he says they've all gone over their stuff again, and they've got military hardware and intergovernmental things. And he says this guy walks in like a Hawaiian shirt and no ID. Everybody had ID. Everybody knew each other in the program. He says, "Gentlemen," he says, "I'm taking control of taking over the meeting here." And he says, "Thank you all for your time." He says, "The target does not exist. You can all go home." And this guy, Doug, was pissed. He was super hardcore Republican, super right wing, super America. Actually, interesting enough, Doug Parkhurst had married G.I. Jane, and they started a race company with her and his son, and a well-known race company in Sonoma County. And really great guy. We used to call him Clint because he looked like and acted like Clint Eastwood on the job. He was one of the cops who used to chase us. And he got into these stories, telling me this stuff later on, cabal type of things. He worked motorcycle gangs, and there's another thing. So here's another control arm of the cabal. They use CIA, cabal, they use the drug cartels, they use the networks. They always have. You see it in movies, but you don't understand how deep it goes. So they use these things to move things, to control governments, that take people out they want to take out. They give permissions. And sure, on the surface, they're fighting them, and there's good people in these organizations trying to fight them, but there's other people behind that are kind of pulling back the stops, just like you're seeing today with the federal investigations that were going into Hillary and others. And there were people higher up who said, pull the investigation. We're not investigating further. Stop that. Okay. This is how the cabal works. And it's masterful. It goes into everything we know and everything we do. It matches and mirrors daily life. If you go to these countries I've talked about, the way people get something done in government, or how cousins and friends and relatives, same thing, like, I can't say that country, where people will get it if they're connected to the president. Oh, same thing in the US. It's no different. So tunnels, yes. I had a friend of mine, good friend, whose uncle I knew, and he had been a prior CIA. He'd been on special forces, and he's sort of telling all these great stories about going up the Alcan to stop the Russians when their land bridge had frozen over and they were out on the ice. And he went into great detail. That's how I knew he was legit, because he was telling me things I knew from other military people and other things historically, and I'd studied some of this stuff. And he talked about how the Russians tripped over his camp in the middle of the night, and all pointing guns at each other, they're ready to kill each other, and they freezing cold in a storm, they can't see, they all kind of put their weapons back and walked away. But this same guy became a preacher, and he's a braggart. He would talk about how, all these things he did, and he was running all these missions down in South America. He became a godly person, so he's a pastor, a missionary. And on one of these tour trips, he's in the jungles and their trucks break down, and he goes and disappears for a while, and he comes back with these military vehicles, US military vehicles. And what he'd done is he'd gone through the woods, and I kind of asked him, and he couldn't, because I visited a drop. This is called a CIA drop, where we have these things stationed all around the world. We have these networks of power and control, They're used for good, they're used for bad, they're used for twisted, but they keep the power structure of the status quo. This is how we're held down. Change your mind, change your thinking, change your status quo. Decide if you want to be on that side, not that hard. I hate to give the advice, because you knock on those doors, but you will be bought, you will be sold, and you probably not make it to the top, because it gets thinner, the air gets thinner, but you have to get compromised. So these
Well, what do you
cartels,
mean? Can you expand on that point? Because I think that's really interesting.
If you look at the famous movie, come on, what's his name? The one in Mission Impossible? I'm losing my name. What? Tom Cruise, yeah. And another actor did it. They did another movie where he was working with the CIA, running drugs with the planes. Brilliant movie. Very well done. Watch that movie. It's a window into operations of how things really go and how people are pulled, stops are pulled out. But you can make your millions, and you can have your heyday, and you can be brought down, you can be left behind, you can be forgotten like that. Okay? All right. What do you want? Oh, Shiva got here. Okay.
I've got another question.
Go ahead.
Does,
Yep.
does human cloning exist? And
Oh,
if yes, since when?
okay. I don't have direct knowledge. I have met people who talked about these programs to me. Some of them under us, like you have your code words. They kind of did it under a protective veil, just like this guy wouldn't say, well, it was a CIA drop because he wasn't supposed to be in it anymore, but he says, I have my friends, I still have my connections. Well, they say once in the CIA, always in the CIA. So you go back, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. You go back to bin Laden. He was a CIA operative. He was an important and very high figure in the Saudi royal family. And he was, the Saudi royal family was the only plane allowed in the air during 9/11 to move out. And the FBI was helping fly that plane. We know one of the guys was on that flight to get them out. And look at bin Laden, moved him all around. And suddenly he's dead, and they bury him at sea in, in a coffin, and you don't even see the body. There's no evidence, no genetic study. Okay, come on. These are the tells. Same thing that Epstein. No body. Oh, well, who checked it out? Who sees if some of these people are still in jail? Epstein, when you have people this integrated, and he probably was working with the cabal and the intel communities, because it's very valuable information. It's not overlooked. They know who these PDFs are and who the integrated networks are. They already have profiles. When you see all this stuff and they go in there, it's amazing the background knowledge they have on these cabal. I mean, these what do you call it? The cartels and such. So you think they didn't know information about Jeff, who has large? I mean, look at the profile. Largest house in that part of New York, and a picture of Billy Boy Clinton in a Lewinsky's dress and red, by the way, red shoes, red high heels, sitting back, looking like a woman. Interesting. He's allowed to have that. And he had one of Bush. Look that up. George Bush with two Jenga towers sitting next to him, and he looks like a kid in the kindergarten, which is where he was when it happened. Look up those paintings. These things have meaning. They're interlaced. What cabal does is it's all in plain sight. It's all deniable. If you look it up, it starts to become obvious. It confounds you. It frustrates you, angers you. That's a mistake. Be balanced. Don't get angry. Don't worry. Free your mind. Learn critical thinking. Learn to listen to all sources. Keep it open on all sources, because your information will change. Your networks will change. If you're that flexible, things will completely change, but they'll come back together and they'll regain the relevance. We talked about a lot of intertwining subjects. Many, many of them. Are there tunnels? Yes. But there are tunnels of times you have no idea, because these huge tunnels are also used for industry, for storage, for, I mean, they drive semi trucks in and out of these things. There's operations going in and out, and there's videos, and you can see live how big some of these things are. Now imagine this budget, this cabal, this power level. These are the same people, the Rothschilds family, of which my cousin who bought the company from my dad, when I said no, he bought it. He was a pretty interesting guy. He married into a Rothschilds relative, direct descendant. They own the Madsen line, which is the shipping company to Hawaii. If anybody looks that up, knows Madsen line. And I used to see him all the time driving. He had a car club, Maseratis, Bugattis, if you name all the big cars, even some that I wasn't so familiar with, and he'd be driving one of these sometimes. Sometimes the car club would have for a while. Sometimes we had the big glass covers for the engine all custom done. He would go every year to Mercedes, and he would have first pick of AMG off the line, special monogram stuff for him. And he was just a little guy. So these people have influence. They have power. They're in every organization. The Freemasons. Every 33-degree Mason is not a compromised satanic guy who's doing ritualistic sacrifices and sodomy. Okay, they're not all doing that. but we know exist. I mean, look, if you look at the reality of the world, let's just take a subject who isn't controversial, and yet it is. Gay people. Gays have been around since the beginning of time. When I studied anthropology, or I studied nature, it exists in wild animals. During the conservative eras, these leaders were talking about these things, and their speechwriters were. A lot of the, Rogers and Hammerstein, a lot of the famous people in Hollywood, the famous playwrights. This is creativity. These people have, not everyone, but generally, that is a man who is more open to the creative side. A lot of the other men have warriorized themselves, dumbed themselves down. But if you look at that culture, okay, so in Greek culture, Roman culture, that was normal. Man loving a woman, or a man, or both. It was through the hierarchy. You look at our modern society, if you go back to the 60s or the 50s, it was frowned upon. In a lot of cultures, it was a prison sentence or a death sentence. But was it happening? Was it occurring? Of course. Look at the Catholic Church. Wonderful Catholic Church. So there's a segue. My family knew this guy who had been a cardinal in the Catholic Church, and he'd been in the Vatican for many, many years, and he left the church. And when I was talking to him about this, one of these really interesting guys, he said, well, he used to do the stacks at the closed library, secret library at the Vatican. And that was what he curated for years. And then at one point, they asked him he said, we need a special person for the locked library, which is the super secret library. Now, if you look again at Da Vinci Code, and they go into the Vatican and they have to go into the super secret biometric locked vaults. Well, hello. But he was telling me about this in the 70s. He says that they asked him to curate this and go through, and he was reading these books, and he says, this contradicts everything we've been told. This contradicts the narrative. This is amazing. Why aren't we telling the public this? Why are we not telling the world? He was told, oh, they're not ready for it yet. It's a little too traumatic. They're not. And lo and behold, a lot of the stuff he was intimating or telling me was basically about all these other subjects, aliens. The truth being that a lot of spiritual teaching, if you look at a lot of these indigenous cultures, they talk about the heart, spirit, the great spirit, connected oneness in nature, that we're all one. If you look at Catholicism and Christian teachings, they talk about we are all the children of God. Now, they made God into a man with a beard, which I never bought. I don't buy it today. I think it's ridiculous because it makes him a man. Then Adam had a man. God made man in his own image. Well, then what are women? Okay. But
Do you
women
mean,
happen
are
to
you
be
referring to
medical.
Baphomet?
What's that?
Did you say man with a beard? Are you referring to Baphomet?
I'm talking about the biblical writings about Eden and
Right.
God creating man, and then he realized he didn't quite do it perfectly, and he didn't want to do a better version, a more beautiful version. So he took the ribs of Adam and he made a woman. Okay, there's the second choice. But women were billed always to me as a kid, Adam and Eve, that the woman was, they never said she was evil, but she took the apple and gave it to Adam. So she kind of brought Adam to this. Adam to me seemed like this, hungry, not very intelligent being who the woman lures over. But if you look at the snake and the tree, the snake is in ancient wisdom about knowledge and medicine. It's the same thing in medicine. Look at these two snakes. It's in all the iconology. This stuff is very important to the cabal. It's very important to spellology. It's very important to the occult. It's very important to rituals. They use it in satanic stuff as well. And that comes up in a lot of the iconology of advertising, but especially music, film, and art. Over and over. You don't have to just go to scary movies. Just go to Beyonce and Gaga and what's her name, who started out the Golden
Well,
Girl.
and Oprah Winfrey. I mean, that when you have this conversation with people who say, "Oh, I don't believe it," it is so prevalent in the imagery, the symbolism, that I always say with this, there is no conspiracy theory. The dots effortlessly connect itself when it comes to
Yes. Okay.
celebrities within the
Get rid
cabal.
of certain words. It's just conspiracy theory. And you tell people, oh, really? Isn't a conspiracy theory a research project? And if there is a conspiracy behind something, wouldn't that make it true? And if you say it's just a theory, how come there's historical evidence and things to point to this and show us where it's going? Why are your minds so closed? Why are you, I mean, same thing with the shot. My family, I'm glad I got the shot. I don't care. And I'm trying to tell them now myocarditis, if you look at what Pfizer had to give up when they tried to seal it for 70 years, and the judge said no. And they had to put out 29 pages, and like the last few 2 3 pages, fine print, back to back, comma, comma, comma. Every kind of malady, Crohn's disease, myocarditis, heart attack, stroke, clotting. These were the side effects that they found. And then they say there's no side effects from a vaccine. There's always side effects from an injectable. Oh, it stays in the arm. Look, my mother was a Stanford nurse. My grandmother was a nurse. I studied emergency medicine. I became an EMT. I grew up around doctors, incredible doctors all my life. Some of them all, my mother was really into alternative stuff. Some of the stuff I thought was so wacky. Light therapy, Royal Raymond Rife. I believed some of it, but some of it seemed fuzzy edged. Now I'm like, holy shit. Was she on it? Did she know these people? Wow, wish back I could go back and talk to this person. Now, some of them were kind of expounding on it with light therapy and color things, making a lot of money. And I felt like they were kind of heart was in the right place, but there's a bit of a charlatanness because they were making a lot of money doing this stuff. Now you can go buy red light machines. Medi-Cal and insurance programs in California will pay for red light therapy, laser therapy. I had laser therapy after car accident on my body and my things. Laser therapy helps to restore and stimulate the mitochondria and the stem cells. It goes all the way down to the bone marrow and stimulates the bone marrow to grow. I mean, there is shit on this earth now and medical information and knowledge that you should be studying besides the cabal that will blow your mind, that will lead you to be free, that can help you get younger. It can help you reverse aging. It can help you get rid of, I mean, stop eating French fries, stop eating fish and chips. I'm sorry, soft drinks. Learn about all the seed oils that have been sold to us as safe and wonderful. And then you roll this back and you look at the historical documentaries and you find out that the cabal orchestrated and implemented all these things, including fluoride in the water, which calcifies your pituitary. It dumbs you down. They used to put saltpeter in military men's food because they found it would lower their libido. I mean, the shit that's rolled out on humanity, and it's been done to humanity, you know, Nestle with its milk, saying it was safe for women, and then training women that their breasts and their own breast milk, which has colostrum in it, was not good for the child, and they weren't getting the vitamins, minerals. But what they really are getting is the entire ancestral immune system through the breast in the first 2 3 weeks in the highest concentration in the colostrum. I mean, if you look what's in the placenta, every animal on earth eats the placenta. In cultures, ancient cultures eat the placenta, but it helps with all the iron and building the mother's strength back. I mean, there's stuff that's like, whoa, I don't want to eat a placenta, even if I was a woman. But if I knew what I know now, I don't know. So, um, I mean, I'm hitting so many subjects. I'm sure people's minds are bending. But anybody studied these different things, take notes on the show on the things you don't know about and research them. And like I said, these things will all come back. The chemical industry, the biochemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the fertilizer industry, the weapons industry, all of these industries have been masterfully manipulated. I'm trying to think of others, including actually the religious institutions. Got it, moth.
Just while you catch that fly, guys, if you're
I
watching
got it.
live, drop a 1 in the chat if you want to see Jazz again on the channel, and drop a 2 if you want to pass. And I just, yeah, wanted to say thank you for taking
Oh
the
my
time
God.
to speak to the audience. And I think moral of the story is keep an open mind and read, and knowledge is power. So it's always great
And
to
just
add.
because you don't have the personal experience or you didn't go through the lifetime meet people I did, it doesn't make me better. It doesn't make me there. It makes you on the journey. So learn, but also spend time investing, learning about the other things that are really amazing and beautiful. Learn how to communicate, learn how to connect with people. Uh, learn about whatever you can do to create your community, because that's how you make this world sane. It's how you overpower and take power from the cabal. Don't buy everything they sell. Don't get caught up in, I mean, I was non-materialistic as a kid. It means I walked away from a lot of these offers and things that make sense to me, but they also, I could see the hook in them. I could hear it later. I could see how quickly I was dumped when I didn't bite. If you pursue a different life and change yours based on little steps you can take by pursuing these other disciplines as well as you pursue the cabal, you'll get clarity, you'll get freedom. They'll never be able to take certain levels away. You'll also learn the legal speech. I don't choose to participate. I don't consent. I knew the words to say to police or anybody who talked to me about COVID or asked me about the shot. And sometimes it got pretty hot and heavy, even with the mask. And we walked free. We had most of COVID. I wasn't locked down. I moved to another country for a while. I wasn't locked down there. I knew what to say. You have to learn these keys to freedom. The same keys the cabal uses, you can use. It all depends on the wielder of the weapon and the wielder of the word. Are you going to be different? Are you going to make a difference? Are you going to make a life that's worth living, a life that's valuable, a life that has impact and helps others? I tell you, it's a lot more rewarding. And the people I know who turned their lives around, like San Quentin prisoner, changed his life. People I worked with who were had been heinous and they changed. Look up the guy who wrote Amazing Grace. What he did was like slave trader, wrote the song Amazing Grace, became a monk.
And how
You can
can
change your life on a dime and make it amazing with whatever you touch. And you'll find that when you learn these codes, when you learn these language, when you walk tall, when you walk proud with confidence and no one can touch you, you will meet and find these other people. They'll start coming to you magically or park bench on a train or at a meet at some conference, and you'll have these conversations. But cabal talk gets a little deep and boring if that's all you do.
and how can viewers find you and find these links after the interview?
Oh, they can't, but I used to try to put them together. There's so many. What I would say, this is what a lot of people told us, a lot of whistleblowers. They say, don't believe me. Don't worry about everything I said. Don't worry about my life. Do your research. My life just parallels and bumps up against a lot of these very interesting families and people. So I got these little vignettes and windows and sometimes deep looks. The same information is available to you, but so is this information to make yourself powerful in a good way. Learn affirmations, learn sacred knowledge, learn what these guys were learning. There's so many layers and echelons. You can take deep dives. You can go on vision quests or shaman, but be careful who you choose. Be careful who you give yourself over. Watch out at bars and parties. Keep your wits about you. Go with the people you really trust, but be ready to dump them if you find that they are compromising you or they are compromised. Walk free, walk tall, and live an amazing life. And you can do it in spite of the cabal. We may never get rid of them, but we sure as heck are making an awareness and exposing them. And the layers are getting peeled way back. The history is coming forward and connecting. This is part of what we can do. The more we wake up, the more we know, there's I'm worried about what they can do with AI, but the less they'll have control over you in your life, and the less they'll have the ability to keep pulling these tricks on us. But it takes a lot of waking up. I mean, look how many people bought each one of these stories I told, and still buy them today, and still defend them. They'll even get violent or yell or scream or cut you out because I don't believe. I don't believe that conspiracy theory. Did you ever research? So it's out there. I mean, but if you get specific, or if we had a show and you wanted to talk about something, I try to do some research and exhume some knowledge. The problem was I did this for so many years. I started connecting dots, and I would connect this one and say that, and I almost sound nutty myself.
Oh, the best people in the world are a bit nutty. And thank you for taking the time to chat through all of this with the
And
viewers.
some of the craziest people have the least stress. That's something, because it'll stress you. Learn to relieve it, let it go.
That's a
Thank you so
very, very good parting note, and great advice. Thank you, Jazz, and have a lovely rest of the evening. And thank you guys all for tuning in and for your questions.
I hope that you guys got a little value, or saw another window. So I hope it was helpful for all of you. See you. Thanks.
Good times.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having me.
guys. Bye bye.